Hi there, it's Doug Pugh back again with our fourth day of tribute to Dr. Darwin Wolford, who sadly passed away last week. Today, on this fourth of 5 days of tribute, I want to look at two of his choral works. These are kind of some small details, but really, really powerful ones. And what I've learned more and more throughout the years with studying with Dr. Wolford and studying his music is there's so much power in the details, especially when you're working to pull off emotional kinds of music that affect a congregation, so to speak. So the first one I want to look at is from This Is the Christ. Now, this is a very famous piece in our LDS tradition, composed originally by Darwin's friend Michael Moody. They were on the hymn book committee together. Michael Moody was the committee chair, and Darwin was the music editor. And Michael Moody was a fine composer in his own right, and wrote this original piece for voice and piano, solo voice and piano, and then Darwin arranged the choral parts. So every time you've heard this in general conference or a temple dedication, which gets performed quite a lot, you're singing Darwin Wolford's music, his choral parts. So there's a lot to look at as far as how he writes these choral parts, but I want to pinpoint a specific spot because he's quite good at turning what was homorhythmic, meaning kind of hymn-like where everything moves at the same time, and finding ways to turn it into a little bit more of linear polyphony kind of writing, which is always more rich and interesting. So the piece starts out, simply enough with the sopranos and altos singing in thirds, and then some little motions. But now here, bringing the men in, look how he brings the men in. Most people would probably bring the men in sync with the beginning of this phrase. They saw him come. But look, the tenors sneak in before the phrase is over. So on the word quake, they get this little eighth note rest. They saw him come. So we're preparing for this beautiful C minor chord with that little suspension there, that 9/8 suspension with the D, which crunches up against the E and then resolves. So the tenors sneak in with the words of the beginning of the next phrase, but a little bit early. They saw him. And then the basses do something similar in the next bar, and they're also anticipating the next text a little bit, a man in white. So we get 1 and 2 and 3 and 1 bass before the altos move. Pum. That's such a great place to let the basses enter because it's happening right as this resolution occurs, and they sneak in on an offbeat, which makes them heard a little bit more. If they started on the downbeat, it would kind of blend in with everything else that's going on. So both the tenors and the basses enter on a different beat, which makes what was a sort of two-dimensional kind of music with the sopranos and altos moving at the exact same time. It turns it into this three-dimensional texture with rhythms happening, entrances happening in different spots. It's a really easy way to turn two-dimensional writing into three-dimensional writing just by having your other voices enter at slightly different times. So it's a subtle little thing, but it adds quite a bit of density to and texture to a simple, ward choir or semi-congregational experience. So a really excellent example of turning two-dimensional writing into three-dimensional writing simply with different rhythm entries, becoming more polyphonic. All right, the second one that I want to look at is from a much lesser-known piece of Dr. Wolford's, and let's pull it up here. Oh, that's the wrong one, excuse me. So if I could learn to use the technology, that would help. Okay, here we are. So this piece is called Our Father by Whose Name, a popular hymn in our book, but Darwin's arrangement of it. And what I want to highlight here is actually not in the choral writing, it's in the modulation. One of our the constant challenges with my students is when we're writing a hymn arrangement and there's multiple verses, how do we make the overall arc of moving from verse 1 to verse 2 to verse 3 with all the same melody in each verses? How do we make the gradualization of moving from each of these verses interesting instead of just the same over and over and over again? And so one of those ways is by using interesting modulations. Now, in our tradition, some modulations have become extremely popular and ad nauseum, and they do kind of make me nauseous after a while because we hear them so often. But here is a really clever, really tasteful modulation of Dr. Wolford's that I wanted to highlight because it's so cool. So we're ending this phrase very traditionally. So the little tune in the men, send to know the homes in which the people dwell. So we're ending in G major. The 1 6 5 1 2 1 6 4 5. Very traditional 1. But then we're going to modulate from G major up to A flat major. Most people would just go up the half step, like Barry Manilow forced direct modulation up a half step. Instead, what Darwin does is it's like thinking, all right, what do the keys of G major and A flat major have in common? Well, very little. They're far away on the circle of fifths. But if you think of the 5 chord in A flat major, the 5 chord is E flat, G, B flat. So the third of that 5 chord, G, is the root of the chord of the key that we just ended in. Common tone. If you can find a common tone between two keys, you can make a modulation. Okay? But the way he does this is so cool. So he ends in G. Now, it's like, whoa. So we go from G major on the D that was in the tenor, goes up a half step to the E flat, but the G is held in the bass. So we get that common tone. It tethers it. Instead of just going, we get the very cool modulation. So the G in the bass, that last bar, remains G. The D in the tenor of the piano part goes up a half step to the E flat with the G. And then the D from the right hand, instead of going up to the E flat like the tenor did, the D natural goes down to D flat. So the two Ds go opposite directions. The tenor D goes up a half step, while the upper D goes down a half step, while keeping the G steady in the bass. So, and then one more element is the B to B flat. So see here at the end, we also, in addition to the right hand D, we have a right hand B natural. And the B natural goes down to B flat as well. Okay, so G, D, B, D. The two D's move in, while the B goes to B flat. And that's how we make the change from G major, E flat, 7 in first inversion. And that E flat in first inversion becomes root position in the next bar. And then 4-2 with the 7th in the bass. And now tonic, the new tonic, A flat major. Super cool modulation. So we end the previous phrase going 1 6 4 5 1. just love that modulation. Very clever, very sneaky with this little half-step motion and a common tone that tethers it all together. That's a modulation to put in your toolkit. Very nice and very different from the typical Mac Wilberg modulation we hear over and over and over and over and over again. Now, it's a good modulation, but it's like, okay, let's find some different ones to use occasionally, and here's a great one. All right, so that's all for our 4th of 5 days of tribute to Dr. Wolford. I've saved my 2 guilty pleasures for day 5, which we will get to tomorrow. They're absolutely delicious, and they're from his violin and piano books with strings attached. One from book 1 and one from book 2. And again, all these pieces that I've talked about this week are available on jackmanmusic.com. Go check them out. He's got a ton of stuff there. These are particularly good pieces that will enhance your worship in your sacrament meetings. So go have a look. And if you like analyses like these and you want some more, and maybe you write some church music too, and you want some more help, come over to latterdaymusiversity.com and join one of our classes. I'd love to help you there. All right, we'll see you tomorrow for our final day with a couple guilty pleasures of mine of Dr. Darwin Wolford. See you then.